America's favorite uncles have a date with danger. We are the Spy-Fi guys, and this is The Man from Uncle.
Welcome to the Spy-Fi guys, where we cover spy facts, spy fiction, and everything in between. I'm Christian.
And I'm Zach.
And welcome back to our Swinging 60s Spy Summer. All this summer, we'll be breaking with our usual formula to cover exclusively fictional spy movies and TV shows made or set during the golden age of spy cinema, the 1960s. So grab your go-go boots and put on your ascots. It's time to get groovy.
And this week, we have The Man from Uncle, which is a TV show that I have heard a lot about, but have never seen. And to join us on this coverage of a single episode of The Man from Uncle, we have two guest stars.
So we have returning guest star, Carolyn.
Hello.
And we've got a first-time guest on the show, Kelly, who is a big fan of this show.
Hi, excited to join you guys today.
You have seen most of this show, in my understanding.
Yes, that's right. It used to be, I think it was free when I was in college, when Hulu used to be free back in 2008. And I watched most of the episodes, probably skipped a few of the boring ones, but really enjoyed it.
Okay, so we're going to be looking to you to answer questions, of which I have many.
I have a few as well. The episode we watched is, season 2?
Episode 19. Right. That's correct.
Called The Waverly Ring Affair. And this is a recommendation by Kelly because, like Zach, I'd heard about the show. I've actually only seen the TV movie, which is like a reunion show for them. The only reason I watch it is because it has the appearance of one George Lazenby as a character called JB, driving around in a gadget-laden Aston Martin DB5. Basically, the only.
Of course.
Yeah, so it's like, all right, so it's sort of in the same universe, maybe, potentially. That and 2015 movie, my only exposure to the franchise.
My only exposure to the franchise is that when we used to watch NCIS was that when I was in high school.
Right.
And the medical examiner, Ducky, would come on, and my mom would say, oh, he was in The Man from Uncle. Or I think she said he was The Man from Uncle. Which may or may not be the case. Which actually brings me to something that I wanted to talk about, which is I have opinions.
Okay.
Namely, Uncle is not a cool name for an organization.
Yeah, I was questioning that too.
That is not a cool word.
I think, and Kelly, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think it was named as such so that when you're talking about it, it wouldn't be so obvious that you're talking about a spy agency. And we'll see that later in the episode.
Interesting and kind of refreshing for the show. I was reading that the name of the show was not originally going to be Man from Uncle.
Okay. But I do have that in our Spy Fact for Spy Fiction section.
Yeah.
So here is your summary from Bill Koenig, writing at IMDb.
All right.
He says, Thrush has a mole inside Uncle's New York headquarters. All signs point to George Dennell, a good-natured Uncle employee who envies enforcement agents such as Solo and Kuryakin. Dennell protests he is innocent, and Solo takes a big chance on George, which leads me to my second question, which is this George Dennell guy, has he been in the show before?
I was going to ask the same thing. Kelly, do you know?
I don't know. It's really just the two of them that are main characters, and as well as Mr. Waverly. Okay. So the other one's kind of blur in my memory, but...
That's interesting, because there were a lot of characters in this episode, a lot of good guys, a lot of bad guys, and so one of them betrays them later, and I was like, is she only in this one episode, or is she in others?
I mean, we could check IMDb to see if they were in other episodes.
I'd rather ask our expert.
Good point.
Yeah, is Carla a regular secretary in the show? That's my question.
Well, so from what I remember, the characters really vary a lot from episode to episode, and they actually got a lot of different guest appearances because of that. Originally the show was really just going to be focused around Napoleon Solo. And actually, Ilya didn't even get as much coverage. But as you see, later, people love that buddy-buddy relationship between the two of them. So you start seeing him featured a lot more. But outside of that, there's not a lot of reoccurring characters.
Okay.
That is the one thing I did like about this. Like other spy shows, you'll have either you go solo, you have someone, ironically enough, solo by themselves, or you'll have a team. But I liked how this is that dynamic between the two of them, which is pretty unique other than maybe, say, I Spy.
Yeah, I was thinking about I Spy as well, because that one is very similar. And that one also came on a bit later. So maybe they took some of the hints from this show. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into the episode. So we start off with a little bit of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. logo and just a snippet of the theme music. Two men enter a shop, one of whom, it takes me a while to realize it's Napoleon Solo because when I look at him, I see, Kelly or anyone else, have you ever seen the show Hustle? It was a British show.
Yeah, but I don't remember him.
He's the old guy.
Okay.
It's like him as a much older character, basically being Napoleon Solo, which I liked.
Nice.
I think it's all currently, I don't know at the time that this is released, but currently it's all on, I think, Amazon Prime. So if you get a chance, watch it. It's a British show. There's only like 6 episodes each season, and there's only like 7 seasons. So you could get through that in like a week. Napoleon and this other guy enter the shop, which looks like a convenience store / like photo developing place.
CVS.
Yeah, like a CVS basically. And so they're both picking up some prints, or like, remember when they used to develop photographs and you had to wait however long to get them developed?
Wasn't that long ago? My mom used to do that.
So this reminded me of the part in The Prisoner where number 6 is going into the store and he's acting all weird and suspicious. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that it's a trap, as Anwar Akbar would say.
Yeah, so Napoleon picks up his photos, and then he watches as the other guy picks up his photos. And then he does basically a 3-card Monty with the envelopes, like doing the card shuffle.
It's like if 3-card shuffle or whatever, sure, you don't know which one it is, but you definitely want to check at that point if you're just throwing around the photos everywhere.
Up as being kind of just some crazy loony guy, right? Because doesn't he read that
the
poem the card? Yeah. So maybe he was hoping by making a big enough fool of himself. Yeah, it was a little bit of a silly intro though, for sure. I think the show gets slightly more serious after the episode, but yeah.
He doesn't normally act like that while out in the field?
I think it depends. Like the show, so I picked an episode from season 2 because the show it has like some funny episodes, but then it's got some more serious ones too. But then by season 3, like it gets like pretty kind of more into the humorous, abstract kind of stuff and so there'd be more of that kind of thing, I think, going on. So this one's kind of in between the two, right? I think there's some funny stuff, but it's also got a more like straight spy line story plot, right? Yeah.
All right.
I made Christian have us rewatch that opening scene after we finished the episode because that was my first exposure to the show, and I was like, "Wait, who are these characters? What's going on? I don't understand." So it was nice to watch it again at the end, rather.
It was interesting because they don't even try to intro the characters at all. They just sort of go right in. But I guess if it's like a later episode of like the second season, they kind of presume that you know who the characters are.
Who's who?
You would know the 2 main guys for sure. Everybody else gets kind of introduced, I think, right? Like, oh, this is a secretary. This is the, George that works in the back. Because I was doing some Googling while we were talking, and I don't know that he does appear in another episode that I can see.
I checked IMDb, it doesn't look like it. But yeah, so as he's doing the switch with the packets, a woman who's also in the shop catches him and is like, "Are you sure? I think you grabbed the wrong packet." And he's like, "No, I'm pretty sure I have the right one." Ilya, who I didn't notice in the shop before this point, comes up behind her and starts a fight with like the other guys.
Yeah, it turns into like 5 people. Is it like 5? There's a lot of people involved in the fight.
So there's our 2 main characters. There's the other guy who's picking up the photos. There's the woman. I don't know if I couldn't tell if she was in the fight too. And then there's also the guy who was developing the photos.
No, she had the gun.
Oh, that's right.
She did have the gun, but I think she got like hit once and then was out.
Was down.
But also like the quality of the film grain like went way down once the fight started.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
They didn't have the highest budget, so there's definitely some scenes we can talk about it as we get further along too, but there's some scenes where you're like, okay, we'll just imagine that the setup's maybe a little fancier.
Right. But yeah, so after that we go into the main credit sequence and the theme. And like I said, my main reference point for the Man from U.N.C.L.E. is going to be those two movies. And I was surprised, like I didn't, and we'll talk about this more later next week. But they didn't use the Man from U.N.C.L.E. theme in the movie at all, so I wasn't familiar with it. But when I heard, it's like, oh, this is kind of jazzy. It's kind of cool, very much of the time.
That was one thing I remembered about the show was that it felt like 60s, like I think, and you see some of the like the decorations and some of the outfits people are wearing, like I think more so than some of the other spy shows. I feel like
Right.
you know what time period you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we go into the U.N.C.L.E. base or U.N.C.L.E. headquarters, and so they're going through all the different things. They keep talking about Project Windfall, which is apparently a project that Thrush, who is the main villain of U.N.C.L.E., it's like the Spectre to their James Bond.
Yeah, except Spectre is a much cooler word. I mean, Thrush is like okay, it's better than Uncle, but it's no Spectre.
I guess the Syndicate for the Mission Impossible series.
Or Shield or something like that.
Shield and Hydra, yeah. So of course there's always a counterpart. They have a bunch of files in there, and they talk really quickly about all these different things that they apparently know about already. But they find one file that's an U.N.C.L.E. file. The conclusion is that Thrush must have a man in U.N.C.L.E. Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. What a twist. Apparently that's never happened before.
Well, there has been some break-ins before, actually, so maybe the security at headquarters needs to be enhanced, but
maybe a little.
Well, that leads us to the next scene.
Yeah, good transition. So there's a nice scanning system that they have so it took me a while to figure this out. So it's not like a metal detector, but it looks like a metal detector basically. And it goes off, but it only goes off if you're bringing papers, special U.N.C.L.E. developed papers through that thing.
Treated papers.
Yes, treated. Thank you.
And apparently they treat everything, like Post-it notes, grocery lists, everything gets treated. But I liked how it was an explanation of how they were able to detect paper with the machine.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that.
But yeah, and the person who's explaining the system is George, who is, like we said, one of the characters here and seemingly doesn't appear in any other episode. But he's treated like he's always been there.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have a meeting with Waverly, Napoleon, and George, and also the secretary, Carla.
Yeah, they have this conversation here about how they think this George Dental guy is suspicious, and then when it's over and they've gone their separate ways, Napoleon Solo is told that he is in charge, and he gets this thing called a Waverly Ring.
Have these appeared before, Kelly? Do they appear again? What's the deal with these? Because they seemed, again, they're treated like something that we should know about already, but we don't.
It's definitely a feature, as far as I remember, in other episodes. But I think it's supposed to be, their sort of humorous way of the suicide pill, or, the need that if you're that top-level agent, that you're, basically willing to sacrifice yourself if you need to, because you've got really access to really private information, But it's their sort of humorous way, right?
The whole thing with the Waverly Ring is that you put it on, and then you can't take it off without the special key. Otherwise you'll blow yourself up.
And
it's
not just that.
Around you too, potentially.
Yeah, everyone else has to do what you say.
But so I was wondering about it, because when I first heard that, I thought it was like a hypnosis thing, but it's apparently just like a signal that you're in the know.
Yeah, it's not like actually hypnotizing them.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like both. It signals that you're a high level person, but I don't know, maybe I'm just interpreting it this way, but my thought was also it's dangerous, right? So you're taking it on to like, you're saying like that you're willing to to blow up those around you if it needs to be, which is kind of how they start using it later on, right? So.
That's true, they do.
People are exiting out of U.N.C.L.E. headquarters, and the scanner's going off, or not, it's scanning them as they come through, and I like how he goes, like, the scanning text, like, having them go through one by one. It's like, wow, that reminds me of, like, going through an airport.
Yeah, absolutely.
As they're going through, George is walking through, and the alarm goes off. He's like, I might have written down, like, my shopping list.
Yeah, it's not going very well. Or they're like, we don't think that you necessarily did it, but we're still going to detrain you.
So the detraining setup, it's like, so they sit him down at a desk, and there's this like disc with this spiral pattern in it, and it's spinning around, and apparently there's a hypnotic beam, and Ilya and Napoleon are like standing far back behind him. The lab tech reassures them that if you're standing at that, you might get a mild headache, but you won't get hypnotized. Like, okay, I definitely thought it was like going to be something where they're going to accidentally get hypnotized.
I had that thought too.
Yeah, this scene was pretty interesting. It just went on a little too long. And during it, there's an ad break. And then when the ad break's over, they come back to it. It's so
Well,
strange.
I mean, it could signify for them that it's actually been going a lot longer than we think, than we saw. They have him count and basically does like a Jedi mind trick sort of thing. You will not remember this. You will not remember that.
Mhm.
So he's going to forget. His memory will be completely intact. And he'll remember that he worked for Uncle. But he won't remember, and he'll even remember names of people. But he won't remember what they actually did in the organization, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that's a pretty big memory gap. To like, what? How do you explain your entire job of however many years?
You don't, because you don't remember.
Seems like that could be a flaw in the future.
Well, I feel like that's almost true to life with, like, if you're working in like, especially the CIA. I've read books where, like, people, if they're leaving the CIA, they can't explicitly list that on their resume. So they have this large gap, and they sort of have to explain, all right, what were you doing during this whole time?
My fiance made a point during this part that, like, why is it that he still knows, like, where he works and who he works with?
Right?
And I was like, oh, because they didn't brainwash that part. And he was like, but why? And you know, if you think about it, like, it is a little bit silly, right? That they would want him to be running around talking about Uncle in public like that. So that's okay.
I mean, I guess they could have put him on an island with a big balloon ball that keeps him from leaving.
Yeah.
That's also a solution.
I guess they can't brainwash him to think something else. They can only brainwash him to forget things, you know? Because otherwise, I would think you would want to just brainwash him to think he worked at, like, a shoe shop or something.
As they bring George out of the detraining room, Napoleon asks him, I don't remember exactly what he asked him, like, what procedures. They hold on, and he takes these contact lenses, opaque contact lenses, out from his eyes, and he's able to accurately describe whatever system Napoleon was asking about. And so, surprise, he's not detrained, and they're going to send him into Thrush as a double agent.
It's risky because he could be the actual mole. So they're taking a risk to send him in there.
The next thing I have is more about the Waverly Rings. They command, quote, instant obedience. We've sort of been over that.
Okay.
And he goes to see Carla, and they talk about how she used to date George. Or they went on one date.
Oh, is that it? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
They're trying to set up a little bit of, like, competition between George and Napoleon. Since, like, I guess a little background, since we've really never seen this George guy before, but
or Carla.
Or Carla, but it seems like George wants to be in operations like they are versus his, like, technical job. So
right.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I figured out at the end of the episode who George reminded me of, and it's Cyril Figgis from Archer.
I can see that.
That's totally who he is.
Yeah.
Right down to wanting this woman who doesn't love him or whatever.
Napoleon talks to Carla, who's heard about George and is, like, surprised and shocked. She even suggests maybe we need some new security protocols. And she's like, I feel bad because maybe I missed something in his file or something, because she's in charge of all the files, apparently.
Which makes me wonder how much she's responsible for. You know, she's kind of made out to be this lowly secretary, but if she's in charge of the entire clearance process,
that's an important part. Yeah.
That's a huge job.
Maybe they mean secretary like Secretary of State.
Or the IMF secretary.
It's the time period, though, where women did a lot of the behind-the-scenes work at these types of agencies, right?
Right, without any of the credits.
Yeah, what's that movie?
Hidden Figures?
No, well, yeah, but I was thinking about that humorous movie more recently, the spy movie.
Yeah, this is called Spy.
Is it Spy?
Spy, yeah, where she's, like, the operative in the background. Yeah, anyway, cut that out.
No, it's all right.
I'll leave it in. Also, Napoleon asks Carla out to dinner and then says, oh, wait, no. She agrees, and then she says, oh, wait, no, I've got a business appointment.
That's so great. This next part's so great.
We know that she's free for the night.
Yes.
Is what we learned out of that.
I guess so. Yeah, that's a good point. And so we find out that Waverly is going to Japan. Apparently that one of their agents there, Bradford, died. And so Waverly has to go for a day or two to make sure everything is set in place for their Japan branch. And he leaves Napoleon in charge.
And Napoleon immediately gets comfortable. I don't know if you guys noticed that, like leaning back in his chair. Yeah.
Well, Napoleon was in charge. That's why I thought it was weird. I guess he's like, not only is he in charge, but he has no checks on his power. Like just him.
So George calls Carla and asks her to go to dinner because Napoleon canceled on her. We know she's free. But she's first resistant because she's like, why are you even calling me? You left Uncle and you were a traitor and all that. And then he's like convinces her because like, oh, didn't we ever meet anything to another? It was not like that. I think, well, weren't we ever friends? Like, I guess so.
The eternal question, are you really friends with your coworkers or do you just have no choice because you're around them all the time?
Right.
They were supposed to have lunch.
It's said that they usually have like lunch dates so that Carla could keep things just as friends.
So they missed their lunch date, so they moved it to dinner.
Insistent about that, though. Do you think that they were suspicious of Carla at the time?
I don't think so.
No.
Okay. He just
I don't think
still
so
liked her, I guess. So thought it'd be fun to have her come.
When Napoleon is telling him that what he needs to do, he says that you need to start making angry outbursts about Uncle. So George figured this is the best way to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was feeling really bad for her because once they go out to dinner, she's just sitting there silently while George is just going on and on about how terrible Uncle is. I don't remember what he says.
This is my favorite part.
And
I like this
so
part.
I felt really bad for her. I was like, man, they're just using her. She doesn't even know that she's part of this whole thing.
That's true. That's a good point. They could have clued her in, maybe, sort of.
Yeah, she had no clue that.
Or they could have used some other patsy who wouldn't get their feelings hurt. I mean, all she had to do was sit there.
Yeah. As this is going on, George is going on and on about Uncle. The woman next to him on the other side, because they're like at the bar, is like, oh, I know what you mean. My uncle owns this whole thing and won't even give so-and-so a job. It's like, no, not your uncle. Uncle, UNCLE. So this is why I think I like the name of the organization where you could talk about it without being explicit that it's a spy organization.
Yeah, you can tell this was made in the past, though, because New Yorkers nowadays would be like, just ignore him. Just ignore him. Don't feed into him. Don't pretend he's talking. I like how she tried to engage with him, try to have a conversation, this total stranger, and he just totally blows her off.
And so he keeps shouting about it. And then we notice that Napoleon's behind him. He just sort of appears, just like Ilya sort of appeared in the photo developing place. So they just sort of appear out of nowhere. And he suggests to George that, maybe you're talking a bit too loud and everything. And then George punches him.
Yeah.
So you know what this reminded me of was Galaxy Quest.
Oh?
The part in Galaxy Quest where he says to Alan Rickman, remember episode 75? And then they start to pretend to argue and then they fight.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of like, George is yelling Napoleon Solo's real name and that he works for Uncle. Like, whose brilliant idea was that?
Well, agents know Napoleon Solo and Ilya, so it's okay.
They're like the two most famous agents, right?
Yeah, they're always trying to kill them, but they, always give them a lot of opportunities to get out by making the attempts at killing them as preposterous as possible.
Your Austin Powers,
yeah,
ridiculous death trap, and I'm not even going to watch them die.
Well, this episode is especially egregious, but we'll get there when we get there.
When he punched George,
he
punched him into a girl, and I noticed that he lingered there a little bit longer than he should have.
Yeah, Napoleon is a bit of a player, but definitely got that element of the James Bond character going.
All right, so in the next bit, they send George undercover because he's got a meeting set up with a SMERSH operative. They give him a pack of gum with a tracker hidden inside it, but the SMERSH operative immediately sees through it and attaches it to a nearby car.
And I think it's like, did he purposely get rid of the tracker in the situation, or was it just because he's a bad field agent? I don't know.
That's true. That's a good point.
Anyway, so back at Uncle Base, Ilya is having some very similar suspicions to the ones Kelly just mentioned. Is like, why did George put the gum on the wrong car if he was actually on our side?
Yeah, they immediately assume George did it and not the bad guys, which is interesting.
Why would the bad guys know about it? That's
true. That's a good point.
And he says it's either an accident or it's intentional, And Carla comes in. She found that George had a mistake in his files. Apparently, during grad school, he was doing a study abroad but he still got the credits at his home university. So they think maybe that's where he got turned and was made into a Thresh operative.
Right.
And the next thing we see is someone with a Waverly ring approaches a uncle agent at a newsstand,
Mm-hmm.
and activates the Waverly ring and tells him to give him the communicator. And so this gets reported back to Napoleon, but for somehow the guy didn't see who had the Waverly ring. He just saw that they had a Waverly ring, so didn't see his face somehow. I don't know. Maybe he had a hat on and it was dark at night.
Didn't really make
know.
much sense.
No.
Yeah.
Napoleon thinks it's George. Must be George. And so they're trying to contact Waverly to see if the Waverly gave George a Waverly ring. But they can't get in touch with him, even though he's supposed to just be in Japan. Apparently he's flying over the polar ice caps. And the Aurora Borealis is blocking communications, which is kind of nonsense. But okay, we'll go with it.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't they say something that made Carla seem suspicious at this time? Like they mentioned it, like, oh, Carla would have been in a good place or something like that.
Yeah, they do. So as they're trying to figure it out, they mention again File 40, and they're thinking about who has access to File 40 documents, and apparently Carla does. And so that's when they think, it could even be Carla.
That's right.
So George calls Napoleon and tells him to bring some File 40 documents, specifically the headquarters security plans to this facility that he's at.
Super top secret.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're leaving headquarters, and Napoleon sets off the alarm as he brings something out. And then he says, oh, it must have been this phone number I wrote down on Uncle Paper. And then, of course, Carla's there. And she's like, oh, a special phone number?
Just like a woman to think of that stuff.
Oh, I didn't even realize that's what she meant by that.
I'm saying what the show is saying. I don't actually believe that.
Okay, just to clarify, because the way you said that.
Yeah, she's jealous because Napoleon is so sexy.
Thank you, Kelly.
If it was Henry Cavill in this, okay, I might agree. But, it's just, what's the actor's name here?
Robert Vaugh. You're not into Robert Vaugh, Christian?
I mean, we could just leave this here.
No, that's fine. He's not your type. I understand.
I think most people would say Ilya's the cuter of the two, though.
That is true. I think I have a weird amount of side knowledge about this show, having not seen the show, but I remember that he would get all the fan mail.
Yeah. They weren't even going to make him a main character, except he was so popular that they were like, all right. We'll make it
so he's like the Mr. Spock to Napoleon's Captain Kirk is what you're getting at?
Sure, yeah.
I kind of like Napoleon. I like his personality.
I think he had more personality.
Yeah, I would
at least in this episode, yeah.
It would be good to see an episode that's more focused on Ilya, because I think they kind of take turns. It's not always Napoleon leading the way, with him just being the second player. So
he gets out the phone number on the piece of paper, and then the poor the scanning tech is like, I'm going to have to send you through again. And then Ilya, this is where Ilya gets a little bit of personality, because I liked how he did this. He bullies the guy into letting Napoleon go, just pulls rank and says, don't you see, we're in a hurry, we have something as a B, and bullies the guy into letting him go without putting Napoleon through a second scan.
Isn't this like a con man thing or like a spy thing where you give them something to find in the hopes that they won't find something else?
Yeah, I guess secret agent.
I really liked what he said afterwards. And he was like, I'm going to have to report that guy for letting me bullying him into not doing his job.
That's what Christian was getting at when he says we get some personality. And I appreciate that.
Poor tech. Yeah.
So at the development plant, Napoleon meets George. And George asks for the drawings. But Napoleon's like, what are you going to do with them? And he's like, well, don't you trust me? I was like, and we find that there's also these armed thrush guards, including, I think, the one guy we keep seeing. Or is he there? I don't remember.
I think it's the same guy.
He is, yeah.
But this part was crazy. So they both have guns.
Yeah. Napoleon
has no guns. And he just walks up to them and fights them. He's like Batman. He's just like, bam, bam, pow, no problem.
So he knocks one of the guns out. I don't know and then I think he goes for the other guy. They're fighting over it. George very slowly is crawling towards the gun.
Mm-hmm. Well, George didn't want to blow his cover.
Yes, but Napoleon doesn't. Well, I guess he maybe should have thought that, but.
Yeah. Well, George was like, if I don't get to the gun in time, then I won't have to turn the gun on my friend.
But he gets the gun, and then Napoleon even says, wow, you took your time doing that. And George says, well, I didn't have to take your time because you seem to be outnumbered, and then turns the gun on Napoleon.
Right.
Yeah.
And they go through a trick door in the facility. Then it wasn't clear how the trick door opens. Usually, like with that kind of door, there's some sort of thing, like, in Indiana Jones, they like hit the, hit something on the side, or other things, you pull a book. But that one just seemed to open when they were near it. Ilya is looking for Napoleon. Apparently his communicator went off, and like the communicator tech has been trying to get in touch with him, but no response. And George is showing Napoleon his new digs, and it's this big open hotel suite, like a
really nice.
Yeah, really nice 60s design. So a lot of curves and
Kind of me of like the James Bond episodes where he gets captured, and he's like, they're showing off and like showing him in like a comfortable suite and everything.
Gives him some scotch.
Yeah.
And
height of luxury.
Yes. So we find out that apparently the new thrush facility that was in Japan, which is mentioned very briefly at the beginning in like the files that they're going through that they got from the photo place. So that was all a rumor. And it's actually going to be built right here. They don't say where here is, but I assume it's New York, because stuff like this always happens in New York.
Right.
Napoleon guesses, so that's the reason why Bradford was killed, because he was on to the fact that there was no Kyoto facility. And we find out, no, Bradford was killed to get Waverly out of the way, so that Waverly would have to go overseas to Japan.
Right.
Because everything can happen as long as Waverly's not there.
Right.
Well, he's got the Waverly rings. Apparently, so does everybody else, by the way. There's like 4 Waverly rings.
Maybe that's why they got rid of him, so everybody else could just go in and grab themselves a Waverly ring. I don't know. I think at this point, too, he validates that the file, right, is like actually the right file, which...
Yeah, he does.
Does that like kind of make you laugh that Napoleon just like grabbed like a real file and took it with him to meet with like...
Yeah.
A potentially
super top secret.
Anyway, just
that doesn't make much sense.
It doesn't, but we talked about this very thing in Mission Impossible and in Breach, where in Breach, in the movie about Robert Hansen, they actually gave him access to all these things. They couldn't use fake files. They needed to catch him in the act of actually stealing something, which... Like, I know in our Mission Impossible one, I'd address the criticism that, all right, why is he stealing the actual knock list? Why couldn't he get a thing? It's like, this is like what happened in Breach is no less crazy than what happened in Mission Impossible.
Fair enough.
So it's a thing that seems ridiculous, but is weirdly true to life.
He might help them create this really dangerous weapon.
I'm not defending the practice in real life. I think that's not a great idea.
The risks that an intelligence agency has to do to find out the culprit.
Yeah.
Maybe.
George is going on about how great it is to work at Thrush. Really nice here once you get to know them. And it's a little bit of an old home week, because guess who else is in Thrush?
Carla.
It's Carla.
This is my favorite. This is my favorite part.
Yeah? Why?
Why is it your favorite part, Carolyn?
Because I feel like when Carla has been in the scenes up until now, she's kind of like this meek secretary that just kind of does whatever she's told to do. And she's always either talking about helping somebody or relationship stuff, and you really see like a change in her demeanor and her persona, where she's like this, girl power, in charge, get things done, let's run this organization and do Project Windfall, and she kind of is a leader. So I thought that was a really interesting thing for the 60s, to kind of show both sides of a woman.
I think that's good, because it kind of takes like that stereotypical thing that maybe she's actually been manipulating them, which is actually true. I think a lot of times women back then and even now, like sometimes you use those stereotypes, right, to get information behind the scenes. So can't miss a...
Well, that was the thing in like these old movies and stuff, is you can have women in leadership positions, but they just have to be bad guys. Like Disney's a really good example of that too.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Why do you think people like them so much?
The original girl power.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like also Catwoman from the Batman 66.
Right. Yeah. Do we ever find out what actually Project Windfall is? Because they mentioned it a few times, but we don't really know what it is.
Yeah, it's the plan to take over.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's the plan.
Right.
And I think we kind of skipped over this. Like, so Napoleon was trying to fake that he didn't bring the files, but they search him, and then George gives him exactly where it's in like a secret compartment up his sleeve in like the inside of his left cuff.
Zipper pocket.
Yeah.
Which I thought was cool.
Yeah. Is that standard for
Probably.
Uncle agents to have a zipper pocket there?
I think he's like the analyst guy, so my assumption was he'd be the kind of guy that would come up with those sorts of ideas.
Yeah, he's kind of like the Q in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this part's important because it shows he's digging himself deeper in with the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I was very disappointed in him.
So they leave Napoleon in the room. Well, they say they're going to leave Napoleon in the room because they got big final meetings for Project Windfall. And they reveal there's an electronic jamming field in the headquarters, and also because he's known so much. And I like this. There's a like nice parallel to, all right, George knows too much, so he has to be detrained. Napoleon knows too much, so they're just gonna have to kill him. And they say it in a very civilized manner, just like sort of just matter of factly, which I was amused by.
Mm-hmm. But then it's like he has nothing to lose now. Why wouldn't he try to escape and take down as many of them with him as he can?
If every bad guy thought that way, we wouldn't have these great episodes. So
Right.
So the next part is right out of Doctor Who, where he bluffs the guards.
This is my favorite part.
Yeah, the jammy dodger maneuver.
Yeah. So he takes one of his cufflinks and he says it's a self-destruct device. Oh, you guys don't have one of these?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, it's basically he's taking the principles of the Waverly Ring and saying that it's in his cufflink. And if I activate this, it'll blow up everyone in the room. The two guards who are left there are panicked. He throws it. Of course, nothing happens, but they distract him, so he's able to make a run through the door, which was not locked for some reason.
They had guards. They don't need a lock if you have guards.
Goes through a hallway, and he's about to go through this one section, but he hears a hum, so he realizes there must be some sort of field or something, and he just crawls under it, presuming that it's only in one part, not the whole door.
This part's so ridiculous.
You can see the little things on the
That's
doors.
true. You can see the activators between the two.
That's fine, but then the guard runs into it and dies. It's like you don't know your own security system, dude.
Right.
Yeah, the laser beam.
Yeah.
At least he didn't get like cut in half or something.
That's true.
he sees Napoleon on the other side, so he assumes Napoleon turned it off.
That's a good point.
We can go with that, right?
Yeah, sure. We'll go with that. The other shouts, "Turn off the field!" And he goes through, and then Napoleon gives him a nice judo chop right to the neck. Then a bunch of, I thought these were Uncle guards at first because it's not clear, but then I see there's a patch with a bird on it. So, these must be Thrush.
The patch has a bird on it. Thrush. I get it.
Okay, so I have a question for Kelly, which is the guns. What's the deal with these guns with like the thing on them?
I don't know. They're just extra cool looking.
Funny you bring up, there is a gun called the Uncle Special, which we didn't see in this episode. Which is like this gun that so it's like a handgun that you can assemble into becoming like a long range gun. And that was what I remember. There was the toys of that in the 60s of the Uncle Special.
Oh, it's fictional. It's not real.
Yeah.
Oh. I do like that there's a bluff here where they're all clustered around the unconscious guard. Napoleon's like, oh no, he's in trouble. I'll go for help or something like that.
Uh-huh.
So he escapes. And the next bit reminds me of that part in Terminator 2 where he's on the chain, except instead of going down into lava, he goes up to the ceiling.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is he doing? He can't escape it that way. But then I was like, oh, right, the jamming.
He's trying to get above the field so he can make communication, and he gets out just enough to say where he is and that there's a door, but he doesn't get to say where the door is.
Mm-hmm.
And so we go to the next act, and we find out that Ilya got the message, but he doesn't know where the door is, so he's going to go over to the facility and try to look for the door.
Mm-hmm.
And Napoleon is going to get the new Thrush disposal facility tested on him, which is going to wrap him in plastic, add weights to him, and then use jet propulsion to whoosh him to the bottom of the bay.
Very complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like they love having like these really intricate ways that they're going to kill Napoleon and Ilya. Like I think it's kind of funny because it's always like very violent, but of course it also takes a lot of time, so it gives them plenty of time to escape in the meantime.
Was that supposed to be a test for the legitimate hazard facility that they were supposedly in? Was that supposed to be the whole thing?
I guess so.
Sure.
Because they're in a hazard facility. So I'm assuming that's the front for their organization.
So Ilya arrives at the facility and he's looking around, doesn't see where they could be. They take Napoleon to the disposal facility section, and George is like, I don't want to look, I don't want to see this. Napoleon, tries to pull some moves on Carla to get her close enough to him. As she does that, he grabs the gun from her, tells George to close up the chamber that they would be put in, and he activates his Waverly Ring. And then they also, both of them, apparently have Waverly Rings. They both activate them to show that one of those two is not real.
I didn't understand what was happening at this point.
I had to pause it and be like, hold on. They all have Waverly Rings. What does that mean? Presumably, one of them is the mole and has a fake one.
But aren't they all like pointing them at each other and like moving their hands in a circular motion?
What they're doing is they're rubbing the side of the ring, which activates the ring.
And there's like a little sound.
To give off the signal and to light up.
It was like something out of Captain Planet.
Threatening each other with it, I guess, right?
Right. It was strange. That's all I have to say about
it. I want to know why they didn't notice that they all had Waverly Rings before. Those are
That's
like
a good
huge
point.
rings.
They look like alumni rings, basically.
Like a college class ring or something.
Yeah.
You'd think they'd be more observant since they're spies, but whatever.
And it's not like they could take them off and put them on to like only when they're, want to show them.
Yep.
Both George and Carla are trying to make Napoleon believe that my ring is the real ring and that one's the fake one. So he like finally says, all right, you know what? Fine. You, Carla, you stand here. George, you stand there. All right, Carla, I believe you. George, take off your ring. I say, what? No, if you do that, no, doesn't matter. Take it off. You've clearly got the fake one. As he's trying to take it off of George, Carla runs away, which proves that Carla knows that George's ring is real and that it will blow up.
Oh, I think I missed that.
Yeah.
So George claims to be a triple agent after all. And he also says that the drawings are real, but they're also useless.
Yeah, and they're useless because like he brought him like a weapon which doesn't work at all and would take months, which is not a long time.
That was my thoughts. Like if it just takes if it just takes months to get fixed, like that's not very long in the scheme of building things.
I liked the scene where they're each giving their arguments for why they have the real Waverly Ring. I thought Carla had a good argument, and because one thing that had bothered me was she brings this gun in, and then Napoleon just like takes it out of her hand, right? I'm like, she's supposedly this trained thrush double agent, and now they're making her to be this weak woman. To your point earlier, Carolyn.
Yeah.
Then I liked that one of her arguments, I think, is, do you think I would have just handed you, like, let you just take that gun from me if I wasn't on your side? And I was like, that's a good point. But of course, that's just her thinking on her feet.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like a bad guy thing that when you lose, you're like all part of the plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next I have is they're like running around blowing up everything.
Even though they've figured out that Carla's the mole, they are still stuck in the facility. And so Napoleon sends George to get all this flammable material, and they light it on fire, creating a lot of smoke. I'm not sure what they were trying to do with this, but I figured it out. So Ilya, on the other hand, is still in other parts of the facility. He's looking around. He notices smoke coming out of somewhere.
There's also a point at this where Carla says, activate auxiliary power. I like because it sounded like something out of Star Trek.
It did, yeah. Napoleon and George are wandering around, so it's very smoky. They can't really see anything, and they get caught by a bunch of thrush guards. And they're about to gun them down when Ilya drops down behind Carla, just like wrestling with Carla, and Carla shouts, "Shoot him, idiots!" And then they shoot, but she's in the way, so she gets shot.
It's a very sad, kind of shocking death.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that.
That's rough.
But as soon as the guards shoot Carla, by accident, Napoleon and Ilya shoot the guards.
Oh my God, such a body count. John Drake would never approve of any of this.
Yeah.
So, last thing in the episode is Waverly says, "It's your turn, Mr. Napoleon," and he's getting his ring taken off, and then he's crossing his fingers that he won't explode as he gets taken off, and that's the end of the episode.
Oh, is that why he was crossing his fingers?
I think so.
He's terrified.
I thought it was like I didn't really mean it. I'm the mole after all, sort of thing, or something.
That would be a twist if he was the mole.
Well, yeah, he's crossing his fingers in like a really weird way.
Yeah.
Like doing like hand signals. like sign language.
Also, he had like this other ring that looked like it could have been a Waverly ring, but I think it's just like a signet ring on his pinky. But it's like, is that another Waverly ring? I was like, no, I'm just reading too much into it.
Ring of Power. I keep trying to call this episode in my head like the Ring of Waverly Place.
Lord
that.
of the Rings.
All right, Zach, what do you have?
No, I had what you had, so I'm good.
Okay.
So one more thing that I thought about the episode, since we watched that first scene again at the end, that I felt like that woman in the drugstore with the gun was kind of foreshadowing that it was Carla, that it was going to be the mole after all. Because, you're in this drugstore, you think it's just the suspicious guy at the desk, and all of a sudden this random woman who you thought was just a civilian comes out of nowhere with a gun. And you're like, whoa, a woman can be part of an evil organization? Maybe they can.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that is it for our episode recap. Next, we have Spy Fact versus Fiction. So I understand Kelly has some, or is Christian going to do it?
I've got some, and Kelly can comment on it, as I know she has something to say.
Okay.
So one thing which I have here is a bunch about the new disposal facility they have. So it seems to be a variation of what's known as cement shoes or concrete shoes, or also known as Chicago overcoat. It's a method of murder or body disposal, usually associated with criminals such as the mafia or gangs, where they weigh down the victim, who may be alive or dead, with concrete and throw them into the water in hopes that the body will never be found.
Ugh.
So there are actually some real-life incidents of this happening, apparently, including the body of Philadelphia racketeer Johnny Goodman, who was found by crab fishermen in a New Jersey creek, weighed down with an 18-kilogram block of concrete. But yeah, so more about the actual show. So UNCLE stands for the United Network Command for Law Enforcement. Now, apparently one of the creators, Sam Rolfe, actually wanted to leave the meaning of UNCLE ambiguous, so it could either refer to Uncle Sam or the United Nations, but concerns by the MGM legal department about using UN for commercial purposes resulted in the clarification that UNCLE was an acronym, and it didn't have anything to do with the UN.
I see.
Oh.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I thought about the UN and like, oh, okay, they're the international good guys and Thrush is the bad guys. So
Yeah.
kind of makes sense.
So speaking of Thrush stands for the technological hierarchy for the removal of undesirables and the subjugation of humanity.
Well, if you're going to dream big.
That's intense.
And so Ian Fleming actually contributed to some of the concepts after being approached by the show's other co-creator, Norman Felton. And apparently he proposed the two character names, Napoleon Solo and April Dancer, who was later spun off into the girl from Uncle Show. The series, although it's fictional, achieved such cultural prominence that props, costumes, and documents and a video clip are in the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum in the exhibit on spies and counter spies. And similar exhibits are in the museums of the Central Intelligence Agency.
He did love his movies.
Kelly, did you have something else to say about the Ian Fleming thing?
Say similar to what you said, that Ian Fleming was involved in the creation of the Napoleon Solo character, and they were actually going to call it Ian Fleming Solo originally.
Really? I did not know that.
But at the time, and you're probably more familiar with this, the James Bond reference. There was a James Bond movie at the time that also had a solo character in it.
Mr. Solo,
so
yes.
There was they were going to be sued basically, and kind of they even had Ian Fleming, I think, had to sign an affidavit saying that this was a unique character in order for the show to even keep him as a character. But they had to agree to change the name of the show basically. I thought that was really interesting. I think that it has a different ring to it if it had been Ian Fleming
Solo.
Yeah.
Ian Fleming Solo, a Star Wars story.
There you go. Yeah, the character Mr. Solo is in Goldfinger, and he's the one, if you remember Goldfinger, he's the one who all the criminals are agreeing to do the plan except for him, and so he gets his money now, and they send him with a ton of gold, and then he gets crushed in a car crusher.
That I do remember.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Goldfinger is one of my favorites, even though it has that really sexist scene in it.
Which one?
You know, the rape scene.
Oh,
Oh, in
Jesus.
the barn with Pussy Galore. Yes.
Yeah.
It's not great.
Yeah. Which, like, I totally don't even think I got, like, the first 2 times I saw that movie until I was, like, a little older, and I was like, oh, yeah.
All right. Anything else for Spy Fact vs. Fiction?
No, I think that's it.
All right. So now it is time for our favorite quotes. This episode was pretty quotable, had some good dialogue. What were some of your favorite quotes? Should we start with Carolyn?
Well, I made Christian rewind so I could write down the contents of the card that was written at the beginning when he's kind of acting crazy at the drugstore. So it was holy smokin' yompin' yemeni, have a birthday that's whiny and lemony.
God.
I like that.
It was just very silly.
Oh, wow.
And very seemingly 60s.
Kelly?
Kelly, how about you?
I really liked when Ilya was commenting on, you know, his need to report the security technician for not doing his job, where he said, "Too bad, I'll have to report for allowing me to bully him into not doing his job properly." I thought that was funny and kind of realistic.
Yeah, that's
All
a
right.
good one.
Zach, I have 2, so hopefully you don't steal one of or both.
I'll just do a couple from the beginning.
Yeah.
So when they're talking about the scanner,
there
the
it
text
is.
says it can detect a passionate grasshopper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wrote that down and forgot what the context was. So I was just reading through my notes, and it said detecting a passionate grasshopper, which
Yep.
out of context is also a great quote.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so Zach, you did steal one of mine, but my other one was when they're confronting, or when George is getting interrogated by Waverly, Napoleon, and Ilya, and Napoleon's like, "I believe you, but if I'm wrong, you know, I'll personally spread your extremities across North America."
Oh my goodness,
It's like, wow, that's kind of dark.
Especially after he just said that he trusted him and knew he was his friend.
Yeah.
So, kind of rude.
So
All right, so now it is time for our ratings on a scale of 1 to 10 martinis, 1 being the worst episode of TV you've ever seen, and 10 being unbelievably amazing. How would you guys rate the Waverly Ring Affair of The Man from U.N.C.L.E.?
I'm gonna say 6.5, which I would say is a good rating. I definitely enjoyed it. It wasn't as, I don't know what adjective to use. Yeah, I enjoyed it and didn't find too many things cringeworthy like in other 60s movies.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it.
All right, Kelly?
well, I'm supposed to be the big fan, but I think I'd probably I would just give it a 7 because I mean I really enjoy the story and the plot, but I felt like there was some parts that got kind of long in this one that you know, maybe it could have just been like a, you know, 40-minute episode. It would have been, I would give it like an 8.5, but maybe a 7.
All right. I will give it a 6 out of 10. I found this to be more engaging than some of the other TV shows we've watched. Like, I like Secret Agent, but it is much slower in comparison to this. The stuff with the rings didn't make any sense, and it kind of lost me. The hypnotism scene went on a little too long, but I liked that the triple agent, double agent, reverse, that was all really good. So that's why I feel.
Yeah, it had some good twists where you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will give this a 7 as well. I enjoyed the episode a lot. Definitely enjoyed. I'm looking actually at some of the other episodes or other shows from the 60s that we've covered in this retrospective, and I'd rate it higher than like Danger Man or well, actually no, I rated it about the same as The Prisoner. But it was, I liked, you know, the action wasn't necessarily great, but I wasn't really focused on the action. I was really more focused on, all right, the twists and turns, and I enjoyed the summer. Like, there were some goofy gadgets, but not too much that was like made it completely ridiculous. But yeah, I thought it was a lot of fun.
Which I think is why I like this show. Have you guys done I Spy?
Not yet.
You should do it. I mean, I know it's got Bill Cosby and all that, but I really like that. That show I probably like even more than Man from U.N.C.L.E. It's just been a longer time since I've seen it. But I would definitely I don't know if we could find it anywhere though. But
yeah, it's definitely not as well known as some of these other ones.
But it's like, I don't know, their relationship is really adorable, the two main characters.
All right.
Well,
And it's one of the first shows that actually has like a black character that is you know, he's smart. He's the smarter of the two of them. He's more, he's better educated than his counterpart character. And I don't know, it's kind of cool. All right, sorry, cut this out. This is just me.
Leaving it. We're leaving it in. All right. Well, when we do, it is on our list of things to cover. Well, actually, that and the movie are on our list of things to cover. So whenever we do that, we'd love to have you back for those, Kelly.
All right, sounds good.
Yes, thank you to our guest stars for joining us. Is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. You can find us on social media at the Spy-Fi Guys under Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until next time, I'm Zach.
And I'm Christian.
And we are the Spy-Fi Guys, signing off.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed our podcast, please be sure to rate and review us on iTunes. The theme music is by Jer Fitzgerald and Big Man Joe. Media reviewed by our podcast are the intellectual property of their respective copyright holders, and no infringement is intended.
This is a personal podcast. Any views, statements, or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the participants. They do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the participants may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity unless explicitly stated. Any views or opinions are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, or individual.
You can find our podcast on social media at the Spy-Fi Guys on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.